Hey guys, tonight we slip back in time about 700 years or so and find ourselves on a night that could make your teeth chatter just thinking about it. The air outside is sharp enough to sting your lungs. The moon is smeared in thin clouds, and the ground is as hard as a frozen loaf of bread. You push open a creaking wooden door, and the smell hits you first. Smoke, damp wool, and something vaguely like cabbage stew that's been simmering since last Tuesday, probably. Inside, the heat isn't exactly cozy. It's more like two exhausted boxers trading lazy punches. The fireplace throws out flickers of warmth, but the icy air pushes right back through every crack in the walls. You probably won't survive this if we're being honest, but for now, you can at least step closer to the hearth. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, if you're feeling social. Post your location and the local time in the comments. I always love seeing where you're re-listening from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The hut you've just entered is smaller than your living room. It has exactly one real source of heat, the open hearth in the center. The fire burns low, partly because fuel is precious and partly because smoke needs to find its way out through a hole in the thatch. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it just hangs in the air, making your eyes water. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants actually got used to the smoke or just endured it with a lifetime cough. But either way, you're breathing it in. You stretch your hands toward the flames, though the heat barely makes it past your fingertips before disappearing into the chill. That S because medieval homes weren't built for insulation, they were built with whatever was on hand. Wattle and daub walls, basically sticks, smeared with mud. Let in drafts like an open Twitter feed lets in bad opinions. A thatched roof might keep out rain, but the wind not so much. Still, the fire matters, not just for warmth, but for light cooking. And keeping the wolves of the dark, both the literal kind and the things that go bump kind, at bay. Someone nearby pokes at the embers with an iron rod, sending sparks up toward the rafters. If you look closely, you can see herbs hanging overhead drying time, maybe a bunch of sage. They're not for decoration. They're for flavoring what little food there is, and sometimes for fumigating the air. One quirky tidbit you notice. There's a tiny iron trivet propped near the coals, holding a warm stone. The stone will go into someone's bedding later. A crude but effective hot water bottle. Children curl up on straw pallets near the fire, noses peeking out from under wool blankets. Their cheeks are flushed from the heat on one side and pale from the cold on the other. A hen clucks softly from a shadowy corner because, yes, poultry sometimes came indoors during the worst nights. Partly to protect them from frost, partly because their little bodies give off a surprising amount of warmth. You step toward the back of the hut, where the cold deepens. Your breath hangs in the air like faint mist. The further you move from the fire, the more the darkness seems to press in. You notice a wooden chest sealed tight where grain is kept safe from both damp and rats. On the floor nearby lies a bundle of sticks, the last of the firewood. You feel the temptation to throw them all on the hearth at once, but you know better. You have to make them last. The flickering firelight plays tricks on your eyes. Shadows stretch and shrink, and the occasional snap of a log sounds much louder than it should. Someone tells you half-joking that bad spirits creep in through the cold spots. You smile, but you shuffle a little closer to the flames anyway. That's the thing about nights like this. Even the most rational person starts to believe the dark has teeth. From outside comes a distant howl. Could be a dog, could be a wolf. You're not sure, and you'd rather not check. Wolves were a real concern in many medieval villages, especially when food was scarce in winter. People kept fires burning, not just inside, but sometimes outside the hut's entrance, hoping the smoke and heat would deter prowlers. The fire pops again, sending up a flare of light. For a few moments, the warmth feels like a hug you didn't know you needed, but you know it won't last forever. The embers will fade, and the cold will creep back in. So, like everyone else here, you learn to savor each flicker while you can. In this world, you don't control the cold, you just bargain with it. Tonight, that bargain means enduring smoky air, cramped quarters, the constant edge of chill, for just enough heat to get through until morning. You can exactly step away from the fire for long without feeling the cold gnaw at you like a half-starved cat, so you start thinking about layers. Not the sleek, fleece-lined jackets you might have today, nope. Your winter fashion here is an uneven, scratchy collection of whatever cloth you can scavenge or barter for. First comes the underlayer, maybe a rough linen shirt if you're lucky. The linen in winter feels about as insulating as a wet paper towel. Over that, you wrap on wool, lots of wool. It's thick, it's heavy, and it smells faintly like the sheep it came from because, honestly, it hasn't exactly been through a modern spin cycle. Your outermost layer might be something like a cloak or a patched-up tunic. Its color's faded from years of wear. The threads in some places are so thin they're practically whispering, "Retire me." But you can let go of anything warm when the wind outside sounds like it's sharpening knives. Historians still argue whether peasants had easy access to undyed wool, or if they more often wore browns and grays, because that est just how unbleached wool looked after months of grime and smoke. Either way, no one here is walking around in Instagram-worthy winter outfits unless faded potato sack chic makes a comeback. The sleeves itch, the collar itches, pretty much every seam itches. You can escape it because wool was the go-to material for medieval winter wear. It kept heat in even when damp, and since washing was rare, it, well, kept everything in. That means not only warmth, but also the occasional flea or louse, setting up a permanent address. You scratch your neck and try not to think about it. To protect your legs, you pull on hose to separate pieces tied at the waistband, then some sort of overgarment, like a rough skirt or long tunic. You're lucky enough to have boots. They're probably leather, lined with scraps of fur, or stuffed with straw for insulation. Well, and yes, that straw shifts around when you walk, crunching softly like you're smuggling a handful of autumn inside your shoes. You notice a curious little trick. Some folks wear their clothing to bed, not just because it's warmer, but because putting on cold clothes in the morning is a level of torture nobody volunteers for. A quirky tidbit, in especially bitter weather, people might even sleep with their outer cloaks wrapped around them, hood up, so they could roll out of bed already dressed for the day. Not exactly the pajama party vibe, but it works. The process of layering up is more than just comfort, it's survival. Without modern heating, you are the insulation. The layers trap pockets of air that your body warms, and once you've got that cocoon built, you hang onto it for dear life. But it's also heavy. You feel like you're walking around under a pile of damp laundry, and every movement is a negotiation between warmth and freedom. Somewhere nearby, an older woman is repairing a tear in a tunic by candlelight. Her fingers are stiff from the cold, and the needle looks like it could double as a nail. She's using thread spun from flax, because every scrap matters. You can just toss something out because it's worn. You keep mending until the garment is more patched than original fabric. This creates a kind of accidental family history stitched into the cloth. As the firelight flickers over your own sleeves, and you catch sight of a small patch, a different shade of brown, sewn on with uneven stitches. You remember when it was added last year after the fabric tore, hauling a water bucket. That patch is a badge of endurance. In a way, every villager wears their winters like this, visibly, your overlayer, patch over patch, proof of how many cold nights they've already survived. Still, there's no getting around the discomfort. The wool is coarse, because medieval spinning methods didn't produce the ultrafine fibers you might find in a boutique store today. While felting could make the fabric thicker and warmer, it also made it stiffer. So you trade one problem for another. You shift your shoulders, trying to find a spot where the collar doesn't rub raw against your neck. No luck. Your breath fogs up as you move toward the wall, testing just how much those layers are helping. The difference is clear. Near the fire, you can almost feel your fingers again. Near the drafty corner, the cold slides in under your clothes like it's been waiting all night for the invitation. You tug your hood tighter, feeling the rough wool against your cheek, and you're grateful for every uneven stitch holding it together. Someone makes a joke about how if you wear enough layers, you're basically your own straw mattress. You laugh partly because it's funny, partly because humor's another layer against the cold. You'll take whatever warmth you can get. You've been hovering by the fire for hours now, but eventually, sleep starts to pull at your eyelids. The thing is, going to bed in a medieval winter isn't about picking a pillow and flopping down at S about tactical warmth management. You're not heading off to your own cozy, private bedroom. You're re-squeezing into a shared sleeping arrangement that would make a modern hotel manager break out in hives. The bed might be a simple wooden frame with a straw mattress, or sometimes just a heap of hay on the floor, maybe with an old blanket thrown over it. But here's the real trick. You don't sleep alone. People here pile together, family, neighbors, even servants forming a human heating system that runs all night without firewood. You lie down in a tight line, side by side, your body pressed up against the next person's, like spoons in a drawer. Children and elders often get the middle spots, because they're more vulnerable to the cold, while younger, sturdier folks take the edges to block the drafts.
Oh.
It's a system born of necessity, and after a while, you stop thinking of it as awkward as. It's just what you do if you want to wake up with your toes still attached. Historians still argue whether peasants often shared beds with their livestock inside the same sleeping space, or simply kept them in an adjoining room. In smaller dwellings, the answer might be both, depending on the night. But on the coldest evenings, you might find a goat or two at your feet or a chicken roosting quietly nearby. Not exactly glamorous, but trust me, a cow lying in the corner is basically a living radiator. And yes, people talk in their sleep, snore, shift, and cough. You're aware of every sound because your head is inches away from someone else's. One quirky tidbit. In some places, people didn't sleep through the night in one stretch. Instead, they practiced what's now called segmented sleep, dozing for a few hours. Waking in the middle of the night to tend to the fire, talk quietly, or even pray, then going back down for a second sleep before dawn. It's not a sleep schedule you'd see recommended in a glossy wellness magazine, but it fit the rhythm of a world without electric lights. The smell is layered. Smoke from the hearth clings to everyone's clothes, mixing with the faint temps of sweat and wool, and the earthy scent of straw bedding. You might wrinkle your nose at first, but here, it's as normal as the smell of laundry detergent in your own home. Besides, after a while, the cold dulls your sense of smell, nature's little mercy. You shuffle in closer, pressing your legs against someone else's. The warmth spreads slowly, like tea steeping. Your own body heat feels magnified in the closeness, and the blankets or patched together sheets, cloaks, and animal skin strap it in. You can actually feel the difference in your hands and feet, though it's still far from cozy in any modern sense. Occasionally, someone mumbles a half-asleep comment, and the rest of you quietly chuckle. Humor lives here, even in the dark. You might whisper about the day's work or the weather because, yes, talking about the weather has been humanity's small talk of choice for centuries. Or maybe someone shares a story they half remember from last winter. Laughter warms you almost as much as the bodies do. The fire is still burning in the other room, but its warmth barely reaches you now. That's why positioning matters. The edge sleepers sometimes get up in the middle of the night to shift closer to the middle if someone else rolls away. This causes a chain reaction. One person scoots, another complains, everyone mumbles, and the shuffling stops when everyone's heat is redistributed. For all its closeness, spoon sleeping comes with risks. Fleas and lice are more than willing to treat a bed full of people as an all-you-can-eat buffet. You try to ignore the occasional itch, reminding yourself that at least you're not freezing. In this world, you get used to small discomforts, the way you get used to the ticking of a clock by noticing them less and less until they read just part of the night. The rhythm of breathing around you settles. Outside, the wind is still howling, but here, pressed between two warm bodies, it sounds like it's far away. The human heat turns the air in this cramped space slightly damp, and you can feel moisture collecting on the inside of your hood. Not pleasant, but still better than frostbite. Eventually, your mind drifts. You're aware, faintly, of shifting shapes in the dark, of the fire popping in the next room, of the faint rustle of straw as someone turns over. Your last waking thought is gratitude, not in a grand poetic sense, but in the simple bodily relief of warmth against cold. When you wake, the fire's glow is little more than a faint orange smear in the other room, and your breath puffs white in the dim air. Your stomach's already growling, which means it's time to check the pot. There's always a pot, because in winter, you keep one going as long as possible. The idea is simple. You don't cook fresh meals from scratch each night. You tend to a perpetual stew. This morning, or is it still night? You shuffle to the hearth, shaking off the stiffness in your legs. The pot is blackened with soot, suspended over the embers by an iron hook. Inside, a thick, dark mixture bubbles lazily, the smell earthy and a little sour. Yesterday's cabbage is in there, along with barley onions, maybe a bit of dried pea, or turnip. And if the household's lucky, a sliver of salted pork or bacon rind for flavor. The meat isn't meant to be eaten outright. It's more like a flavor donation. You stir slowly, watching the steam swirl up into the rafters where it condenses on the beams before dripping down again. The bread on the table is hard enough to build with. It's rye bread, dense, dark, and several days old. You knock it against the table, and it makes a dull thud. That's why you'll soften it in the stew, letting the liquid soak in before taking a bite. Without that trick, you'd probably break a tooth. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants preferred their bread fresh, or if they actually found hard bread more filling, because it took longer to chew. Either way, here and now, pre-chewed by boiling is the way to go. A quirky little custom you notice. The person stirring the pot always tastes it first, not out of greed, but because they're checking that nothing's gone sour or moldy overnight. It's an unspoken safety test, and honestly, the stakes are higher than your average cooking show critique. Food poisoning in the dead of winter is not a challenge you want to take. You ladle out a portion into a wooden bowl, careful not to splash its precious stuff, and wasting it is basically an act of economic sabotage against yourself. You drop in a piece of the stone-like bread and watch it sink slowly before softening and breaking apart. The smell is comforting in its own humble way. You sit close to the fire, cradling the bowl in both hands, letting the steam warm your face before taking the first bite. It's not gourmet. It's not even what you'd call good if you had options. But it's warm, it's filling, and in this weather, that's enough to make you grateful. You notice that the stew's flavor changes day by day, sometimes for the better, sometimes not so much. Fresh vegetables are rare this time of year, so dried herbs, pickled roots, and whatever meat scraps are left from autumn's slaughtering season are your flavor toolkit. Children in the corner are gnawing on crusts, dipping them into their own bowls. One of them makes a face and mutters about wishing for honey, clearly a dream from better seasons. An older man laughs and tells a story about a winter long ago, when someone tried to make fancy bread by adding beer to the dough, it's only to discover it just made it taste like sour grass. Everyone laughs because really, in a winter this long, the smallest culinary disasters become entertainment. Beyond the stew, there are small side staples. Maybe a lump of cheese if it hasn't gone moldy, or a jug of weak ale, since drinking plain water isn't always safe. You sip some ale that's barely alcoholic, but it's enough to keep you hydrated without risking bad water. In some regions, people would also make pottage thicker than a stew, almost like porridge using oats or millet. That was less about taste and more about making the most of whatever grain they had left. The bread's softened enough now, so you scoop up a bite, chewing slowly. It's chewy, earthy, and oddly satisfying. You're not eating to enjoy your eating to arm yourself against the cold. Every bite feels like another brick in the wall between you and the freezing wind waiting outside. Once you've eaten, you help stir the pot again, making sure the bottom doesn't scorch. Someone tosses in another onion and a handful of dried peas. The stew will keep simmering for the rest of the day, absorbing new flavors, thickening until it's ready for the next meal. It's a cycle, never-ending, always evolving, and sometimes better not to think too hard about what's in it. And in a strange way, there's comfort in that. No matter how bitter the wind, no matter how long the night, there will be a pot on the fire, a loaf to break, and a bowl to warm your hands around. Out here, that's the closest thing you've got to a promise. The stew leaves you warm for a little while, but the cold is patient. It knows it can wait you out. Soon enough, your lips are dry and your throat itches for a sip of water. In summer, that's no problem. In winter, it's a chess game against the frost. See, water doesn't just get cold in a medieval village. It goes rigid, locking up in buckets, troughs, and jugs, until it's as drinkable as a brick. You head toward the far corner of the hut, where the household keeps its water supply, stored in clay jugs and wooden pails. But here is the clever part. Most of them are in tea, just sitting out in the open. They're tucked under beds, wrapped in spare cloth, or even buried halfway into straw piles. That's because the warmest spots in the house are in tea near the fire. They in those little insulated pockets where human and animal heat builds up. Historians still argue whether the underbedding trick was common knowledge across Europe or just practiced in harsher climates. Here, it's clearly a survival tactic. One quirky tidbit: Some folks even keep smaller water vessels tucked right under the covers with them at night. It sounds absurd until you imagine waking up parched in the dark and realizing your only other option is smashing ice out of a bucket with a stick. Sure, the water under the bed might be lukewarm from your own body heat, but lukewarm beats frozen solid block every time. You lift one jug from its nest of straw and give it a cautious shake. The slosh is sluggish but audible success. You pour some into a wooden cup, the liquid clouded slightly from the clay's surface, and take a sip. It's cool, earthy, and faintly smoky from sharing space with the hearth. It's not exactly crisp, mountain spring quality, but enough to soothe your throat. Of course, water inside doesn't always stay liquid. If the cold pushes hard enough, even the jug under the bed can freeze solid. That's when you turn to melted snow. Grab a pot, scoop up a heap of fresh snow from outside, and set it near the fire to melt. The trick is keeping it clean. No yellow snow jokes here, but truly, windblown dirt and ash are a constant problem. You skim off any floating bits before pouring it into the cup. In places where snow is scarce but frost is brutal, people sometimes crack ice off streams or ponds and haul it back in chunks. Its risky winter ice can be treacherous, and there's always the chance of breaking through. But thirst makes you bold, and desperation doesn't mind wet boots. Once inside, the ice is smashed into smaller pieces with a mallet, then left by the hearth until it becomes drinkable again. In wealthier homes, you might find metal kettles for boiling water to make it safer. Here, boiling is reserved for cooking, because fuel is precious and you dainty waste it just to make your water taste cleaner. Instead, you rely on the slow defense of habit drinking weak ale or herbal infusions for most hydration needs. In fact, a warm mug of herbal brew chamomile, thyme, or mint, if you've got it, does double duty. It keeps you from freezing inside and maybe, just maybe, keeps the village healer happy with your balanced humors. Outside, the frost has painted every surface with a glittering crust. The kind that looks beautiful until you realize it means another fight to keep the water from freezing tonight. You watch a neighbor hauling a bucket toward the animal stall because livestock water needs just as much protection. The cows and goats breathe on their troughs, keeping the surface from icing over too quickly, and sometimes villagers will even break the ice for them before dawn. You glance back at your own jug under the bed, tucking it deeper into the straw as if that extra inch will be the difference between drinkable water and tomorrow morning's ice sculpture. Survival here isn't always about grand battles, it's about tiny victories. It's like finding a cup that still sloshes when you shake it. By now, you've learned that warmth comes from more than just fire it. Comes from anything alive that's willing to share its body heat. Which is why tonight, you're bedding down in the byre. Yes, the same room the animals sleep in. It's not glamorous. But in midwinter, the line between barn and bedroom gets blurry fast. The byre is an extension of the house in some places. And in others, it's literally under the same roof, separated only by a low wall or half-closed door. You step inside, and the first thing you notice is the smell of pungent cocktail of hay, manure, and animal musk. It's not exactly the scent of a luxury spa, but your frozen fingertips forgive it instantly when they feel the difference in temperature. The animal's breath fogs the air in slow puffs, and their bodies radiate heat like big, gentle stoves. You find a spot along the side, near a cow that's lazily chewing cud. She shifts her weight, and the straw rustles under her hooves. There's a reason cattle are prized in the cold. They're practically mobile heaters, and their steady warmth seeps into the air. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants kept animals indoors primarily for warmth or simply because it was safer than leaving them exposed to thieves and predators. Either way, it works. A quirky tidbit: sheep are apparently the least cooperative heat source. They're warm, yes, but far too restless to lie quietly near you. Goats, on the other hand, will happily curl up close, especially if they think you might share a bit of bread or turnip with them. Tonight, you've lucked out with one goat by your feet, its body like a warm, breathing stone. The straw bedding here is deeper than what you get in the main living space, partly for insulation and partly to keep the animals dry. You settle into a small hollow, wrapping your cloak tighter and tucking your legs under you. The soundscape is different from the house quieter in some ways, louder in others. You hear the slow, rhythmic chewing of the cow, the occasional grunt from the pig pen, and the shuffle of hooves against wood. Somewhere in the rafters, a pigeon coos softly. A a tiny feathered tenant that's been riding out the cold here for weeks. Your breath doesn't hang in the air quite as long here as it does in the living quarters, a sign that the shared warmth is doing its job. But the flip side is that the air feels heavier, more humid. It clings to your skin and seeps into your clothing, making it smell like the byre long after you leave. You pull your blanket tighter and think about the odd intimacy of this arrangement. These animals aren't just property, they're survival partners. Without their warmth, the house fire would have to burn hotter and longer, chewing through fuel you can't spare. And without their milk, meat, and labor, next year's survival would be even harder. In the dead of winter, you see them less as beasts and more as oddly shaped roommates with questionable hygiene. There's a kind of peace here, though. Outside, the wind scrapes against the walls and snowflakes hiss as they hit the thatch. But inside the byre, the night is slow and steady. The cow shifts again, her flank pressing lightly against your back through the thin wall of straw. It's like leaning against a warm boulder. At some point, you close your eyes, listening to the animals breathe. You think about how warmth in this world doesn't always come from where you expect it, not from grand hearths or thick blankets, but from the slow, quiet radiance of another living thing just trying to get through the night like you are. It's too early for dawn, too late for first sleep, and the darkness hangs heavy enough to feel like another blanket. You're lying there in the byre, half awake, when you hear a low murmur from the main room. It's the sound of voices slow, unhurried, carrying the warmth of familiarity. You follow it, wrapping your cloak tight, and step back into the smoky glow of the hearth. Around the fire, a small knot of people sit close together, bowls of ale or warm broth in hand. Their shadows bend and stretch on the wall, flickering with each shift of the flame. This is the night's other kind of heat, the heat of company. There's nothing formal about it. Someone mentions a rumor from a neighboring village. Someone else corrects it. And before long, the talk drifts to the local equivalent of small-town gossip. It's here that the real winter stories are traded, the tales you tell in the daylight. One man, cheeks flushed from the fire and maybe a little ale, swears he saw a pale woman walking along the frozen river last night, her feet never touching the ice. An older woman laughs softly, saying it's just the wind catching the snow, but she crosses herself anyway. Historians still argue whether such fireside ghost stories served more as entertainment or as subtle warnings to keep people indoors after dark. A quirky tradition emerges in the telling. Some households toss a pinch of salt into the fire while speaking of the dead, a way to keep restless spirits from listening in too closely. You watch as a pinch of salt crackles in the flames, releasing a faint hiss. Moonlight seeps through the cracks in the walls, silvering the edges of the room. Outside, the snow reflects the light so well, it's almost like a second, softer day. You could step out into it if you wanted, but the talk here is better. The rhythm of voices rises and falls, punctuated by bursts of laughter, the kind that makes you forget for a moment that your toes are cold. Someone starts a ghost story about a headless rider who roams the roads in midwinter, searching for the warmth he lost in life. Someone else interrupts to insist that it's not a rider but a black dog, its eyes glowing like coals, and that they've seen it themselves. The fire spits once, sending sparks upward as though joining the conversation. But it's not all supernatural talk. There are memories of hard winters past, of nights when the stew pot ran dry, of mornings when you had to break ice just to open the door. You listen, feeling both the weight and the resilience in those voices. The cold isn't just an enemy, it's a yearly visitor, one you prepare for like you would a difficult relative. Can't stop it from coming, but you can make sure it leaves you with stories worth telling. As the hours slide by, the room gets warmer, not physically, but in that strange way that happens when people share words and silences. You realize that, in a place where the cold can gnaw the edges of your courage, the simple act of talking together is its own form of insulation. The talk dies down, and a few people drift back toward their sleeping spots, but you're still awake. In a world without electric light, night doesn't mean idleness. It means shifting to tasks that don't need the sun. The fire is low, but a stub of tallow candle flickers on the table. Its light faint and buttery, just enough to carve shapes out of the dark. You find a place near the hearth and pick up a small wooden tool. Tonight, You're mending a handle on a cooking spoon that cracked yesterday? The work is slow and deliberate, the kind that lets your thoughts wander. Your fingers are clumsy in the chill, but the repetition of the motion keeps them from going numb. Around you, others are busy with their own quiet projects. A woman spins yarn from a bundle of wool, the spindle whirring softly as it twists. She works by feel more than sight, letting muscle memory guide her hands. Another man sits with a broken pitchfork laid across his knees, binding the split wood with strips of rawhide. Historians still argue whether winter nights were primarily for rest or for this kind of after-dark industry. But here it's clear, you work when you can, light or no light. A quirky sight catches your eye. A boy no older than 12 is shaping a piece of bone into a crude needle. He holds it near the candle flame, warming it just enough to scrape it smoother with a shard of slate. It's tedious work, but a needle is too valuable to lose, and having spares could mean the difference between patching a cloak now or shivering later. The room smells of hot wax and wood smoke, with a faint tense of wool grease from the spinning. The candle guttering on the table has to be managed carefully. Candles aren't cheap, and you don't burn them casually. Every time a draft makes it sputter, someone shields it with their palm, muttering about the waste if it goes out too soon. Your own repairs are finished now, but your hands are restless. You take a length of rough cord and begin twisting it into a tighter braid, thinking about how even rope making can be a fireside chore. The steady scrape and twist is almost hypnotic, the sort of rhythm that lulls you toward sleep even while you're still working. Occasionally, someone hums a tune under their breath, a wordless melody that rises and falls with the soft creak of spinning wheels and the snap of kindling in the hearth. It's not a performance, just something to keep the silence from feeling too large. The candle's light makes the shadows on the walls sway gently, like they're working alongside you. There's a satisfaction in this kind of night work. It's not about productivity in the modern sense. It's about using the hours you have, keeping your hands busy while the rest of the world sleeps under frost. And maybe it's about more than that, about staying close to the fire. It's close to other people, so you can share warmth without even thinking about it. Eventually, the last candle dies, and the only light left is the dull red of the hearth's embers. This is when the waiting begins, the slow stretch of hours between night's middle and the first pale smear of dawn. You lie back on your straw pallet, your cloak pulled up to your ears, and listen. The roof creaks under the strain of the frost, each sound like a stiff joint bending. Somewhere outside, the wind snakes through the gaps in the wall, slipping icy fingers under your blankets. You tug them tighter, shifting to press your back against another sleeper's for warmth. Your toes ache faintly, that dull throb that says they're just this side of numb. You try to guess the time by the sounds, a rooster calls once, confused by the brightness of the moon on the snow, but then silence falls again. Ass in the distance. The frozen ground pops and cracks, a sound you only hear in the coldest nights, when water hidden in the soil swells and shifts. Historians still argue whether medieval people used such noises to judge the depth of winter, or if they simply accepted them as part of the season's strange music. A quirky little practice you've learned here is counting the signs until morning. Some people keep track of the wind's changes, others of the hearth's collapsing embers, others still of the soft scurrying of mice looking for crumbs. You start counting each new sound, letting it mark the passing time. Your mind drifts, replaying the day hauling wood, tending the stew, breaking ice from the water jug. You think of tomorrow's work, though it feels strange to call it tomorrow when it's still the same unbroken stretch of cold. Every so often you hear the soft thump of someone getting up to tend the fire. They stir the ashes, coaxing a little flame to life, then shuffle back to their pallet. The faint burst of heat that follows is brief but welcome, a warm sigh in the dark. Outside the wind shifts, rattling the shutters and sending a puff of cold through the room. You curl tighter, breathing into the crook of your arm to warm the air before it reaches your lungs. It's not comfortable, but it's enough to keep you from shivering, and so you wait. Not for excitement, not for an event, but for that slow, creeping change in the air. That means night is loosening its grip. You know that when dawn comes, it won't bring sudden warmth, but it will bring light. And in a winter like this, that's almost as good. Dawn finally seeps in a pale, hesitant light through the cracks in the shutters. You've barely slept, your rest interrupted by drafts, creaks, and that stubborn ache in your feet. Still, morning means movement, and movement means warmth. You push back the cloak, stretch stiff arms, and take stock of the day's first reality check. Your nose is cold enough to sting. Someone coughs along, wet sound, and you're reminded that winter doesn't just bring frostbite, it brings sickness. The air is thick with damp and breath, perfect for passing on whatever cough or fever is making its way through the village. A woman in the corner is already brewing something in a small pot over the fire. Steam smells sharp hero and thyme, maybe a bit of onion. This, she insists, will keep the cold from settling in your lungs. Historians still argue whether medieval herbal remedies were more effective than we give them credit for, or whether they were just a comforting ritual. A man joins her, clutching a mug of yesterday's beer. It's not fresh beer, the thin, weak, small beer brewed to be safer than drinking the water. Even this early, it's a defense against illness, as much as it is a drink. He swears it warms the blood, though judging by his shiver, the effect might be more psychological than real. You've seen stranger cures here. Once a neighbor stuffed dried rosemary into the heels of her shoes, claiming it pulled out the chill through the soles of her feet. Another time, someone tied a bit of red wool around a child's neck, meant to guard against winter fevers. And then there's the truly odd one, a poultice, of mashed garlic and pig fat, slathered on the chest for coughs. It smells as bad as you're imagining, and no one's brave enough to sleep next to the patient until it's gone. But sickness doesn't mean stopping. Even with a fever, people have to haul water, chop wood, tend animals. You wrap your cloak tighter and step outside for a moment. The air is dry and biting, the kind that makes your eyes water. Frost clings to every thatch and fence post. You cough once, the sound loud in the stillness, and head back in before the cold gets a foothold in your lungs. Someone else is muttering about the bad air and moving to hang a sprig of juniper over the door. It's meant to purify what comes in, to keep the unseen sickness from settling. Whether or not it works, it does make the place smell less like damp wool.
Oh.
The truth is, you don't know if any of these cures really work. But they're part of surviving physically, yes, but also mentally. Believing you're fighting back against the cold and the cough is half the battle. And if that battle happens to taste like onion thyme tea or smell like garlic pig fat, well, you drink and breathe it in anyway. The days blur together in the heart of winter, but now and then, something breaks the monotony of feast. A hunt, or just a stroke of luck that lands more food on the table than usual. Tonight, it's the Feast of St. Bridget, and the whole village is buzzing in its subdued, frost-bitten way. You can smell it before you see it. Roasting meat, actual meat, not just the whisper-thin slices that usually disappear in the first round. Inside the hall, candles smoke against the cold air seeping through the roof beams. A long table is crowded with trenchers, so those thick slabs of stale bread that double as plates and whatever can be scraped together for the occasion. A salted hare, a pie stuffed with onions and herbs, some dried apples softened in honey water. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants actually got to eat much meat outside feast days, or if these events were just rare bursts of abundance between months of pottage. Tonight, though, you do eat. The meat is chewy, but after weeks of turnip stew, it might as well be a royal banquet. You tear it with your teeth, juice running down your fingers, and wash it down with cider that's just beginning to go sharp. Of course, not every winter night is a feast. Far more often, it's a desperate hunt that barely fills a pot. You remember one such night, a group of you trudging into the woods, breath pluming like smoke, searching for anything that moves? Sometimes it's a squirrel, sometimes a scrawny rabbit. Once, you were lucky enough to find a pheasant trapped in snowdrift. That night, the whole hut smelled of roasting bird, and the crackle of the skin in the pan was better than any lullaby. Then, there are the fishing expeditions. Ice crusts the edges of the river, and you have to break it with the heel of a boot. Your fingers go numb tying the bait, but there's a stubborn satisfaction in pulling a wriggling fish from the dark water. Once an old man swore he could catch more if he sang to them, low humming songs. Whether that's skill, luck, or superstition, you still can't say. Feast or famine, the rhythm remains. When food is plenty, you eat until you're drowsy, letting the warmth spread from your belly. When it's scarce, you stretch what you have, turning every bone into broth, every crumb into tomorrow's porridge. You learn quickly. Winter survival isn't just about staying warm, it's about making every bite count. whether it's roasted hare or a watery stew with more hope than flavor. The frost comes down hard on Sundays. It's as if the cold itself wants to remind you that no excuse-aching joints, biting wind, or frozen mud gets you out of church. The bells toll in the distance, their sound oddly bright in the muffled air. You pull on your heaviest wool, wrap the scarf twice around your neck, and step into the kind of morning that makes your eyelashes crust white. The path is rutted and slick, the ground frozen into uneven ridges. Every step crunches underfoot. A couple of children dart past, slipping and laughing, their breath puffing like little steam engines. Even in the cold, there's a small thrill in walking as a group. The press of bodies makes the wind feel less sharp, and there's a strange comfort in knowing you're all equally miserable. When you finally see the church, it looks like something carved from the frost itself, stone walls glistening with ice crystals, narrow windows catching the weak sun. Inside, the air isn't much warmer, but at least it's still. Your boots scrape over the flagstones, and the faint smell of incense drifts in the air, mixing with the scent of damp wool from dozens of bodies huddled together. Historians still argue whether incense in village churches was more about religious ritual or simply masking the smell of the congregation. The service begins, the Latin words rolling over you in a steady rhythm. You Dante catch all of it most Don. But the sound is familiar enough to feel like a kind of warmth in itself. You glance up at the candles on the altar, their small flames stubborn against the draft. One sputters, bends, but doesn't go out. When it's over, you linger a moment, soaking in what little heat is built up inside. Outside, the world is blindingly bright, the frost reflecting the sun in sharp little shards. The walk home will be colder now. The effort of sitting still has taken the edge off your body's warmth. Still, there's a small satisfaction in having made it, in knowing that even the coldest days have their rituals, and you've kept yours. By late winter, the nights feel heavier, the cold more personal, as if it's not just in the air, but in your bones. You start to notice that everyone has their own odd little tricks for keeping spirits up. Some of them are practical, some not so much. Take old Marta, for instance. She swears that if you hum a tune while winding wool, it keeps the chill from creeping into your fingers. She's got a dozen different songs for different nights, some lively, some low and droning. Whether it's the rhythm or the distraction, it does seem to make the work less tedious. Then there's the strange habit of leaving a loaf of bread on the sill overnight. The reasoning varies depending on who you ask. Some say it's to feed wandering souls who might bless the household. Others insist it tricks the frost into taking the bread instead of the warmth from inside. Historians still argue whether such customs were genuine folk beliefs or just harmless quirks that persisted out of habit. You've got your own small comforts. Maybe it's a carved bit of wood you keep in your pocket, rubbing it smooth with your thumb during long, cold hours. Maybe it's sitting close to the pig in the pen for the warmth, of course while pretending you're there to check the feed. Or maybe it's trading little favors with the neighbors. A spare candle stub for a ladle of broth, an extra bit of wool for a patch of leather. Laughter helps too, even if it's thin and tired. Someone tells a story about a chicken that wouldn't stop roosting on the blacksmith's anvil. Someone else starts mimicking the village priest's cough. It's not high comedy, but it's enough to send warmth bubbling through the room for a few moments. These rituals and games, these scraps of connection, keep you going just as much as the fire does. Winter S&T, just a fight against the elements. It's a slow negotiation with your own mind. You learn to trick it, to bribe it, to give it little gifts so it doesn't give in before the thaw. The winter finally begins to loosen its grip, not by vanishing all at once, but by softening at the edges. The snow that once crunched like broken glass under your boots now sinks and slumps, revealing patches of muddy earth. Water trickles under the ice in the ditches, the sound faint but insistent, like the season quietly clearing its throat. The first signs are small. A lone crow cawing in the morning, a hint of green moss on the north side of a tree, the smell of damp soil in the air. You catch yourself staring longer at the horizon, noticing the days stretching by just a few minutes more. Historians still argue whether medieval villagers truly marked these gradual shifts with formal observation or simply felt them in their bones. Inside, you start to peel away a layer or two of clothing. Not much, still too cold for that, but enough that your arms move easier, your steps feel lighter. There's a different kind of urgency now, You begin to sort through seeds saved from last year, fingers brushing over tiny, brittle promises of what's to come. Some folks get restless, talking about mending fences or checking the tools in the shed. Others are still wary, knowing one last hard frost can sneak in like a bad punchline. Keep both ideas in your head at once: the optimism of spring and the caution of experience. One morning, you wake to find the frost is gone from the inside of the window for the first time in months. The hut smells less like smoke and more like fresh air, even with the fire still crackling low. And for the first time in a long while, you step outside, not just to endure the cold, but to breathe in the change, letting it sink in that you've almost made it through. The last true cold night of the season, dose and tea announce itself with drama, just slides in quietly as if to remind you who's been in charge all these months. The wind rattles the shutters, but there's less menace in it now, more of a sigh than a growl. You sit by the fire, its glow steady, and realize you're not hunched in the same defensive knot you were back in December. Your shoulders are looser. You've learned the weight of this season and how to carry it. The meal tonight is modest but celebratory. A stew thick enough to stand a spoon in, bread baked that morning, maybe even a wedge of cheese saved for the right moment. Someone produces a small jug of ale, and you pour sparingly, feeling its heat ripple down your throat. Outside, the stars are hard and bright, but you don't mind stepping out for a moment to look at them. Your breath still fogs, but it doesn't bite the way it used to. You think back to the long stretch of nights how you burrowed into shared beds for warmth, how your fingers learned the texture of wool and the careful balancing act of rationing wood, how stories and silly little rituals carried you through when the dark pressed hardest. Historians still argue whether communities of your size depended more on practical planning or shared morale to survive winters. But you've lived enough of both to know it's never just one thing. When you go to sleep that night, you feel the cold outside in a different way, not as an enemy, but as a teacher who's finally letting you graduate. The lesson is simple, though not easy. Survive together, and you make it through. Alone, you freeze. And now, as you settle back, let the harsh edges of this story smooth into something quieter. Imagine the frost melting from the eaves, the earth beneath softening, the air shifting from sharp to gentle. The fire inside your small room burns low, not because you've run out of fuel, but because you no longer need the blaze to hold the night at bay. Your breathing slows. The cold that once clawed at your bones is now just a memory resting at the edge of your mind. You hear the faint creak of wood, the distant drip of thawing ice, and somewhere far off, the sound of an animal stirring in the dark. Every noise is softer now, like the world is padded in layers of wool. You've walked through winter, step by aching step, and come out the other side, with the quiet strength of someone who's endured and learned. The cold doesn't frighten you anymore. It's part of the story you carry, folded neatly into the rhythm of your days. Let your thoughts drift like the last bits of snow in the wind, unhurried, weightless, until they settle into stillness. The season has changed, and you can rest. End of script. Sweet dreams.